everyone, to today's Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle, in which today we're going to take up the idea of traveling the path and from the perspective of Eco-Dharma and the enlightenment. And we have with us somebody who's going to help us saunter along this path. Bob Buss, who's wearing his Thoreau Sauntering Society shirt.
It's a great art to saunter.
It is indeed. Bob has been a frequent speaker for us on a number of occasions. We're so glad to have you help us out and from the Buddhist perspective. This concept that you used in the title and also in one of the quotes that went out to everyone was that word Dharma. So I'm imagining that we're going to hear a little bit about that as well today. So Bob, please go ahead.
As I thought about this topic, and Dharma is one of the three refuges. It basically means the Buddhist teachings, the Buddhist sense of truth, and the Buddhist sense of a path. And so that's all it means. And the truth itself is the Buddha. The teachings about the truth are the Dharma. And when we try to figure it out together and are supported by others, that's the Sangha. And the quote that I gave really is that, ironically, Dharma is not a secure refuge. If you're looking for a secure refuge, you're not really interested in the Dharma. You're interested in security. And certainly that's fine, but that's what you're looking for. There's something more tentative about the reality and destination of Dharma. And I'm going to get into that. But essentially, my talk is on three things. Walking the Dharma path. So I'm first going to talk about walking. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about Dharma. And then I'm going to talk about the path and how those all three work together. Walking, sauntering is the word that Thoreau uses. I'm going to look at the sense of walking, the path of walking, from three perspectives. One is Thoreau on sauntering. The second is on Thich Nhat Hanh and his sense of walking meditation. And the third is from Wendell Berry, who every Sunday took a walk, sat down, and wrote a poem. And that just seems like a wonderful way of walking and sitting and writing. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. Sauntering, according to Thoreau, is a living way. It's a way, he says, I wish to speak a word of nature for absolute freedom and wildness, as contrasted with a freedom and culture that is merely civil. To regard man as an inhabitant and as a part and parcel of nature. So there's a lot in there. And the whole idea is for us to be a part and parcel of nature. Just to anticipate, that's what I think the Buddha Dharma is about. We are a part and a parcel of all beings. We're not trying to find Buddha nature. We really are Buddha nature. And how we express that is a good deal of what it is about. In talking about sauntering, which is a word for walking, Thoreau very imaginatively and probably just totally off the top of his head, I don't know that this etymology is at all rigorous, but it's imaginative to the infinite degree. He first says, sauntering may come from going a sainter on a sainted ground, a holy land. You might remember when Moses was one of the first times he was talking to God, there was a burning bush. And one of the things that the burning bush said was take off your shoes. You are on holy land. You're talking to God. I mean, get with it. And that's what Thoreau thought about sauntering. Get with it, get into it, go all in, be there. He once said, in my walks, I return to my senses. If I'm not there with the woods, I have no business being in the woods. So opening to your senses, and again, as Kevin said, opening is not all that easy. Listening is not always all that easy. We oftentimes hear without listening. We oftentimes walk in the woods as though we and the woods didn't exist. The second thing he talks about in terms of sauntering is santer. San, S-A-N-S. San means without. San means to take something away. And he says, so it's as if that Santerre was walking on a land that doesn't exist. In other words, without walking as though there was no land, no home, no place, but that in a sense, it was without that sense of attachment to that walking. Thich Nhat Hanh will say, touch the earth as though you were kissing it. That sense of, as Chuang Tzu, a Taoist, would say, free and easy wandering. Don't worry about where you are or where you're going. Santerre, without land, without place, without home. He also said we should saunter like a camel. We should walk like a camel. As he said, a camel is the only animal that ruminates while it's walking. A cow will lay down in the pasture and ruminate, digesting all of the ideas. And that's, that sauntering is a perfect time to ruminate, to listen to the bird and associate with ideas, and just to let yourself nurture yourself there. So the second part of walking I wanted to talk about was walking meditation, according to Thich Nhat Hanh. He says, you can take a step and touch the earth in such a way that you establish yourself in the present moment. You arrive in the here and now. You can walk like a Buddha. Have faith in your Buddha nature. He wrote a wonderful poem to the same effect. The mind can go in 1,000 directions, but on this beautiful path, I walk in peace. With each step, a gentle breeze blows. With each step, a flower blooms. Imagine walking in the woods and taking a step like that, and a second step, and a third step. He says, enjoy each step. We have already arrived. In talking about the Dharma, Kevin and I were talking about stepping, walking, and destination. It's not about the destination. It's about the walking. So there's an interesting thing that Thich Nhat Hanh said at the end, and I'll give this now. People say walking on water is a miracle, but I say walking peacefully on the earth is the miracle. In my Zen tradition, we have a walking meditation retreat where we go off into the woods down Ka'u Wilderness or wherever we go, Haleakala, and we kind of wake up early in the morning, walk for 10 miles, have lunch, walk another amount, and meditate early in the morning, meditate at night. And we call that Hele Malie. Hele is walking. Malie is peacefully, gracefully. So that's that. The third sense of walking, just to introduce the walking part of walking the path, comes from Wendell Berry's Sabbath poems. And he would get up every Sunday morning, Sabbath, and go out and walk. And he'd walk until he realized he was sort of outside his own head and someplace else. And then he'd sit down and he'd write a poem. And he says, these Sabbath poems were written in silence, in solitude, out of doors. The poems are about moments when heart and mind are open and aware. I go among the trees and sit still. One of these poems, very short one, said, best of any song is bird song in the quiet. But first you must have the quiet. And related to our sense of walking, there is a way when the road neither comes nor goes, and the way is not a way, but a place. That's another Sabbath poem. Sometimes they're longer, but this one is short. And the last one, the seed is in the ground. Now may we rest in hope while darkness does its work. Those of you that know Thoreau know that Wendell is kind of echoing him, faith in a seed. So that's the walking part of walking the path. Eco-Dharma, it's just putting eco in front of dharma. Ecology, a sense of interconnection, a sense of system related to each other, and dharma, what the truth is. Buddhist teachings do not tell us what to do, but they tell us a lot about how to do it. And that's the gist of Eco-Dharma. Engaged bodhisattvas, we could call them eco-sattvas, again, ecosystem and sattva, knowing, as an ideal path. And it's a double path. I mean, we go inside, we meditate. We go outside and we do something, some form of activism. And that's Eco-Dharma as well. And we're in a time when we know the environment is under great stress. We're in already what's called the sixth extinction. A tremendous number of birds and insects have already gone extinct. The oceans are in great imperil. In 2050, it said there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish. Okay, enough said. And part of Eco-Dharma is to really recognize that it is not just ecological out there, but we are part of the ecosystem. 10,000 beings and us. 10,000 beings, including that one being, which is us, me. My suffering, my dukkha, is one thing, but the suffering of the system is another thing. Thich Nhat Hanh said, the next Buddha may be a Sangha. When the next Buddha comes, it may not be an individual being, it may be a community. This again is part of the sense of what we mean by that. And really environment, you could flip it over and say, well, it's not just about the environment. If you think you can solve the world's problems by solving the environment, which would be a wonderful thing to think, but probably not to do. But it's not just about the environment. It's about social justice. It's about other kinds of difficulties wrapped up into that. And so that's the situation we're in. And part of the idea of the Buddhist sense is that we do have to be engaged with it, involved with it, but it's not about this sense of, oh, it's all awful. What can we do about it? Buddhist activism is to do something, whatever it is we do, and not be attached to the results. I'm going to do something. I'm going to protest. I'm going to, right now there's mining going on in Indian territories and they're aware of it and they're looking at it. I said, well, we protested before. They never listened to us. Maybe they will now. There's a native person as Secretary of the Interior, but it hasn't been easy, but we still have to do it. And we'll do it without being attached to there necessarily has to be something that happens. We'll do it anyway. We love nature. And because of that, we're motivated to do something. Thoreau said, in wildness is preservation of the world. It's not just wilderness. We don't have to be that remote, that pure. Wildness is something that we can touch. We can listen to if we sit quietly. Thich Nhat Hanh said, when you are alienated from your roots, you seek Buddhas. When you are at one with who you really are, you are a Buddha. So now I'm just going to end with talking about resonance with the way, manifesting the Buddha body in walking the way. Chuang Tzu, the Taoist, says, gives the idea of resonance as having a guitar or a lute tuned to a particular note and having another guitar in the next room tuned the same way. And you pluck one and the other one resonates. You ring a bell and another bell sounds with its resonance. So that's what resonance is. And I think, start with this. There's a wonderful poem by Jane Hirschfield that begins, until by we mean I, them, you, muskrat, the tiger, the hunger. Wendell Berry said, when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work. And that when we no longer know which way to go, we have come to our real journey. The mind that is not baffled, completely, utterly confused, is not employed. It's just not being used. We have to be baffled by what we are and where we are and what to do. And then he closes his poem, the impeded stream is the one that sings. A stream without rocks, without rapids, without something to go around doesn't sing.
Mm-hmm.
Part of this whole thing, and it includes Eco-Dharma, is that we are all self-centered. What matters is how far the radius goes out. With who or what are we willing to be kin, a sense of kinship. Well, the founder of my own tradition of Zen Buddhism, Aiken Roshi, wrote a book called The Mind of Clover. He said, we can destroy the gene pool of the earth organism and eliminate all choices, or we can discipline ourselves and find the source of responsibility. That source is the mind of Clover. There you are, nurtured. There you nurture. Settle there at least once in your life. So I'll end with the entire poem that I started with in this section by Jane Hirschfield. It's called, the poem is called Spelled to be Said Against Hatred. Until by we mean I, them, you, the muskrat, the tiger, the hunger. Until by I, we mean as a dog barks, sounding and vanishing, and sounding and vanishing completely. Until by we mean I, we, you, them, the muskrat, the tiger, the hunger, the lonely barking of the dog, until it is answered.
Beautifully done, Bob. I really love the hopefulness of that idea that when we no longer know what to do, we've come to our real work. It's so contradictory in a way. Like when we have absolutely no idea what to do, then it seems like we've come to an absolute impasse. And
And it's interesting because hope is sort of the active word there, but I don't think hope is what the Buddha Dharma is about.
mm,
I think the operative word for the Eco-Dharma, for the Dharma to express itself, is faith. That we have faith in this path, that we have faith that all beings are interconnected, that we have faith that love will change things, that we have faith that the Buddha got enlightened. I mean, there's an interesting story. The Buddha was being, I think you brought it up last time, the Buddha was being harassed at the end by Mara and, tempted and a lot of things. And finally, Mara said, well, who will testify that you really have received anything? Who speaks for you? And the Buddha, in that famous thing, takes his hand and touches the earth. And this is where I think koans become real. That is the answer. Touching the earth. How do we touch the earth? And what does the earth resonate with us as we do that? A koan isn't about an answer. It's touching the earth. It's actually touching the earth. It's actually doing that act and without thinking about it, without worrying about, am I having an effect, or nothing I do can matter, or how do we change government? I mean, all of that we can think about, but if we don't touch the earth, we're in trouble.
mm,
And that's faith. We believe. We have faith that this practice works, or we never wake up in the morning and meditate, or we never read a book unless we had faith that somewhere there was a teaching that connects to us. Somehow we can make a difference.
Well, I was very moved by that last poem that you read. Could you share that author with us?
It's Jane Hirschfield. And then the title of that poem is called Spell to be Said Against Hatred. Here's the spell I'm going to give to go against hate. And I think that's part of what Gandhi and King were talking about too, is that, that sense of a love is obviously the spell.
Well, it's that, it's a visceral sense of unity, that she evokes somehow. Very simple words in very common experience, right?
Right.
And it's dissolving that boundary of separateness, that she seemed to speak to so well.
Yeah, and that's really the heart of, I think, the Eco-Dharma. The Dharma is we are all interconnected, interdependent. These are the words that Buddhism uses. Thich Nhat Hanh calls it interbeing. That, if we think of ourselves as separate, I'm going to return to nature. Well, when did you ever, fail to be part of nature? When you breathe, you're an animal. I'm sorry, but, we are nature. We are naturing by the sense of living. And that part is really fundamental in Buddhism, that, that's how metta works, is that we are already connected. We are already there. That's a critical thing, I think, to the Buddha Dharma. And it really, what can we do? It's such a depressing time. Well, you can connect. You can listen to a bird. It sounds really small, but, the Native Americans will never really be able to do anything with mining rights and all that sort of thing if the love of nature isn't already there. Of course it is. So then they can speak, they can protest, they can do something. And that's kind of, that's the stepping, that's the walking. Buddhism is interesting in that regard. As I said, it doesn't really tell you what to do, but it will tell you how to do it.
Many Buddhist groups, the whole idea of spiritual activism or eco-activism as part of the practice, it's like integrated part of the practice, has become, more prevalent in the United States and maybe elsewhere as well. Do you know, can you speak to that? Maybe you already have, feel like you already have. But.
No, I think that historically, Buddhism, I think, has been very directed at self-enlightenment, my suffering, my experience of enlightenment. There's certainly the Bodhisattva, the Mahayana ideal of hearing the suffering of the world and responding to it. And that Bodhisattva ideal is certainly, I think, the gist of it changing for various people. Thich Nhat Hanh is very concerned about community and did a great deal of counseling and encouraged people to deal with their frustrations with other people, talk it through. I mean, in his monastery, you didn't get away with just keeping it to yourself. There was a weekly activity of saying, man, by the way, I don't like this person and what they did, and you talk it through. I mean, and as long as it takes. He really, felt that was important, not just for the monastery, but for the world. And I think there's more of that. I think, and the practices can change. I mean, my own tradition, we're kind of vegetarian. I'm vegetarian, but not all of my teachers or fellow practitioners are. It comes from a Japanese tradition, so we're kind of okay with fish. Clams are okay. I mean, it really, and the deeper tradition comes out of that sense of begging for food. So if you're begging for food, if somebody gives you a piece of fish, you thank you very much and eat it. I mean, that's the practice of mindfully eating. I think now vegetarianism is becoming part of the spiritual practice, and related to the very first precept, do no harm. That's just one example. There's a lot of work in Buddhism on racial sangha, and there are more and more teachers who are Black women, Black men as teachers, and more role models. But they said, well, it's tough. You go up to a sangha and you're the only Black person sitting there, and everybody's sitting facing the wall. It's not all that friendly. How do you work with diversity and pluralism when you're in a non-dualistic practice? Well, you struggle with it and you talk it through. But there's a lot of work in racial dharma and sangha, sangha-ing, and how hard it is. And different forms of Buddhism too, Pure Land Buddhism, esoteric Buddhisms, they all struggle with these same things, and I think come up with slightly different ways of doing with it. Tomorrow, on my own tradition, we're going to have a zazenkai, an all-day sitting, and in the afternoon, we're going to do a sangha council. And if you know what council is, it's a particular form of giving everyone an opportunity to talk around a circle. And it's, it comes out of a sort of a native tradition as well as a Quaker tradition. But, we're trying to work that into our way of communicating rather than just sitting back and hearing the teacher give a teisho. See how it works.
Maurice?
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I think you may have already kind of answered this with your last comments, but when you were talking about faith, we have to have faith. I just wanted to ask you more about, and it occurred to me that what's very natural in nature are teachers. Parents are teachers, and then of course spiritual teachers are really part of nature. And I wanted to ask you, is part of faith having faith both in the teacher as well as the teachings? That there has to, and maybe it comes from a divine discontent or something where you need to learn something, but can you speak a little bit more about having faith in your teachers and the teachings?
Well, as I see it, that is the path. I mean, and part of it is at least in my tradition, we have a whole series of koans, which basically are teaching stories from previous teachers, the ancestors, the past masters. But really, if you sit with a koan for a couple years, which we commonly do at the beginning, does a dog have Buddha nature? Moo. And then, commonly we'll sit there for that with a couple years trying to figure out what is moo. Moo is no, moo is emptiness, moo is what is it? And what are we in relation to it, and all of that. So you've got to have a great deal of faith in Zen and in your teacher, that teacher is going to be trying to help you. Because you go to Doksan and you say something, and maybe at one point you just get totally frustrated and angry, and then you work through that. So, I mean, the faith works through all of those feelings and such that we have. And it is, I think, a faith in the teacher. At some point, what is enlightenment? Well, I have faith that the Buddha did indeed awaken under the Bodhi tree to the morning star. Hasn't happened for me yet. So, I mean, it's faith. I mean, I just believe it. I believe the teachings. And I see something within them. I resonate with those teachings. It's interesting, the koan that I gave, and I don't know if you all saw it, was the Kalpa fires are burning. I mean, that's the environment. Things are burning, the sixth extinction, everything is happening. The Kalpa fires are burning and the universe will be destroyed. Is it Buddha nature, reality, consciousness? Is it destroyed along with everything else? And the teacher says, yes, destroyed. Is it destroyed? Yes, completely destroyed. That's the koan. And then later he goes to another teacher and says, the Kalpa fires are burning. Is it destroyed along with it? And the teacher says, no, it is not destroyed. And the student says, why isn't it destroyed? The Kalpa fires are burning. And he says, because it is the same as the universe. And, that's that tricky faith in the teachings in terms of doing something, and then the teachings as being empty. That indeed, there is no place to go. There is no teaching. There's no Buddha nature is already right here. This very place is the lotus land. This very body, the Buddha. Even if I don't know it yet, that's the Kalpa fires are burning, of course, and animals are suffering, and we are suffering. Of course, the Kalpa fires are burning. We know that every day we open a newspaper. But in another sense, we have never been born. We will never die, which was said a few times ago on our gym discussion with the Bhagavad Gita, that, Krishna, in answering it, says, there is no separate being. There is only Brahman, Atman. I mean, so that's a part of it.
Thank you.
It's interesting, though, just one thing. Nagarjuna, the great Mahayana philosopher, Buddhist philosopher, said, be careful with emptiness. It's like picking up the wrong end of a snake. Emptiness is all like, oh, it doesn't matter. It's all, it's all empty. No. The Kalpa fires are burning, and you know it. You don't get to choose one or the other. In the Heart Sutra, it says, form is exactly emptiness. And immediately it says, and emptiness is exactly form. You don't get to go one way or the other, or you're picking up the snake from the wrong end.
I just wanted to really quick ask you, Bob, about the interdependence factor of Buddhism, because, as the situation that happened in Buffalo, New York, hit quite home for me with the topic of racism. And I just saw that the Associated Press put out a new poll that 75% of African Americans do not feel that they won't be subject to some sort of violence or hatred just based on the color of their skin. So in the Buddhist nature, it is true that when one suffers, kind of the whole community suffers. I seem to think that the last time you spoke on the fact that like there's this web, and when one part of the web is affected, everybody is affected. Is that the case of this belief?
And I think that's really the heart of it. Wendell Berry has this wonderful little essay. It's called Think Little. I mean, we're trained from the beginning as Americans, think big, you know, intercontinental railroad all the way through. And Thoreau, oh, it's noisy, wakes me up in the morning. You know, he wasn't against railroads, but he didn't necessarily like them that much. And that's, I think, part of it. How do you think little? I mean, and how do you think mindfully? Wendell Berry, in this essay, he says, the mentality that destroys a watershed and then panics at the threat of flood is the same mentality that gives institutionalized insult to Black people and then panics at the prospect of race riots. Buffalo didn't happen in isolation. It happened because of our history. And, you know, what do we do? Well, one thing is to know more about our history, know more about, you know, what happened in Wellington, Delaware, what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you know, quite a while ago, but got buried by our history. You know, once I was here in Hawaii and I'd heard about the internment. And I thought, you know, I never read about the internment when I was going to high school. So I called up my sister, who's my kind of everyman kind of person out there, and said, what do you know about the Japanese internment? She had no clue. Never happened for her. That wasn't a part of her American history. She's just a regular person. I didn't get it. She didn't get it. Maybe the new kids around the block are getting it, but then now we're starting to get a little resistance to some of that history too. Yeah, things don't happen in a vacuum. I guess that would be the Buddhist sense of it all. And they don't happen without connection. If we think we're going to solve the environmental crisis without dealing with social justice issues, we're crazy. I think we probably all remember that book by Shoemaker, Small is Beautiful. Well, that's, I think, what Wendell Berry is talking about is, you know, going back to the land. He's a small farmer. He knows it has nothing to do with feeding the world. That's corporate farms and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, how do you reconnect with it? And, you know, your feelings about Buffalo are, that's doing something about it. You know, that's thinking about it, sharing your feelings, your experience, not just letting it go and not just being angry, not just going, this is a tragedy. But I was talking about that sense of, isn't life awful? Don't we live in a horrible time? Yeah, we do. And it's not the only time. I mean, really, people have a tendency to do that. The Anthropocene, the age where, for the first time, humans can affect nature. That's an interesting effect. I mean, we are literally driving the force right now with our sense of pollution, with our plastics, with our other things, and with our racism, with our guns. It's difficult not to be hopeless in that sense. And part of that is I think what Renee was talking about, the hope, what I refer to as faith. I don't know. It's not Kuan Yin hears the cries of the world. So what? What do we do? What does Kuan Yin do with all those arms and eyes to see everything and hear everything? What can we do? That's the Eco-Dharma. That's the racial Dharma. That's the mind of Clover that Aiken Roshi was talking about. Wendell Berry kind of concludes, and this is, I think, kind of interesting. He says, We need better government, no doubt about it. But we also need better minds, better friendships, better marriages, better communities. We need persons and households that do not have to wait on organizations, but can make necessary changes in themselves and on their own. That's again the faith that the Bodhisattva is expressing. Getting a better government, I don't know. Hopelessly worried about the midterm elections. I mean, and probably a number of you are too. At the same time, Roe v. Wade may well be overturned. There are people who sincerely believe that an unborn fetus has a certain right to life. And as a Buddhist, I believe that too. I also believe a woman has a choice. And politically, I believe in that. As a Buddhist, I can believe in both of those things. Now, who do I vote for? and again, what do I think? And just, part of it, I think this activity that we're doing, GEMS, is a chance for us to connect with better friendships. These are, talking to you, hopefully we feel a little bit more hopeful having talked about it. At least more hopeful than reading the newspaper and watching the news. It's a pretty low bar right now for me, but we protect ourselves and we nurture ourselves. Dogen Zenji said we should sit with three minds: a mind that is happy, an elder's mind, a mind that is nurturing, as a mother nurtures her own child, and then a mind that is open and universal, non-dualistic. It's a pretty big practice. And it doesn't even touch the political directly, but it says something. I don't think that directly answers what you were talking about. At the same time, that's all I got.
Oh, I appreciate it.
That's all any of us have, really. When it strikes home, that's when the practice sort of begins as well. And Thich Nhat Hanh was aware of that. And he wrote his book, Call Me by My True Names. And that we talked about that when he passed away, that he's not only the boat people, he's the pirate, and he's, all of that sort of, he said he came up with that just out of his own feeling of anger at the way the world was and about the boat people. And he had to say, look, I'm not here alone. And I'm not just identifying with the people like me or people I like. I'm identifying with it all, with the 10,000 beings. Dogen Zenji said, my mind going out to the 10,000 beings is delusion. My going out to control, answer, respond, think about whatever I'm doing out there is delusion. Allowing the 10,000 beings to come to me is enlightenment. Dogen said, all these years of practicing and thinking about the Buddhist way, and it all comes down to, I am the sun, the moon, the stars, no separation whatsoever. When Buddha saw the morning star, he saw himself without separation. That's the practice. And if that's helpful, it's good. It doesn't hurt to sit and find that quiet, still space.
So when it really looks the darkest, that's where our work lies. That's where we begin.
That's where the seed grows, in the darkness. That's the whole gist of it. And really, thinking about the darkness is a lot like thinking about the answer. What's our solution? How do we get through this horrible time we're in? It's not about getting through it. It's not about finding a better way and a better place, a better me, world, and us. It's about what you're feeling and thinking right now, how you're experiencing this, which is a negative time. It's a dark time. I feel the darkness, and then it's a matter of, well, where's the light? And it's, if I was looking at Buddhist principles, I guess the first one I would give is, and this is true for Gandhi's tradition as well, a reverence for life. A reverence for life. That will get you through a long ways, not just human life, but how far can your radius extend? I remember this wonderful book, Black Elk Speaks, and he has the hoop of his nation. And he says, and the hoop of this nation radiates out to my tribe and also to all the beings that I am kin with. And that was the antelope, that was the bear, that was, for him, all of the animals, all of nature, the trees, the bushes, and the crazy people. They said, white men, we think in circles, they think in squares. What are they about? And the black-white people, what are they about? They had a hard time really understanding. They saw what we call buffalo soldiers, but black people who were obviously not native and obviously not white, but they sure wore the white uniform and they kind of fought in squares, just like the white guys did. So they called them the black-white people. And they just wondered, well, where are they in the hoop of the world? How can they be outside of it? How can they square themselves off from the circle? It's a wonderful little paragraph. He talks about that as he's interpreting his dreams. And really the dream is saying, I'm sorry, but your way is about to disappear. And it did.
Maurice.
Yes, maybe this is a koan of some kind, but on my last Zoom today, someone was speaking about Thomas Paine, and in his fourth crisis paper, when George Washington was defeated at Brandywine and was forced to, with his ragtag army, flee from the British, Paine commented, because he was with them, that the nearer any disease approaches a crisis, the nearer it is to a cure. And since we're all, of course, in this global crisis of the sixth extinction and all the dimensions of it, the fire, as you pointed out. So it is a koan because there may be a real truth in this statement, but it's hard to see it.
I think it's interesting because there's a whole nother way of looking at what we as spiritual people and as Buddhists, one part of a spiritual community, what we mean by healing. Healing, wholeness, hallow, to make sacred, holy, all those come from the same root. There's a sutra called the Vimalakirti Sutra, and the Buddha was concerned because a wise layman, Vimalakirti, was sick. And so he asked people to check in on him. And the first question is, well, if he's an enlightened being, how can he be sick? Well, sickness happens to us all, old age, death, and illness. So they went to him, and Vimalakirti says, I am sick because the world is sick. If the world gets better, I will get better. that, that's just another way of formalizing the koan. I think it's the same koan as you gave, but it is the koan.
Well, I suppose that if we can make meaning out of suffering, then if we take, just for an example, the Ukrainian situation, not that we have to have one for the good versus evil thing, but the amount of compassion that is poured out for the Ukrainian side is universal. It's global. Here in Santa Barbara, we have Ukrainian flags everywhere you go, including my dental surgeon. And there is a sense that as the suffering increases somehow, and we get it in our living room every night, that irrespective of sectarian politics of one kind or another, there is just an outpouring of compassion. Whether that's accompanied by wisdom, I'm not sure, but it gives the hope, because with compassion, I think there are those seeds for wisdom to sprout.
Right.
And so even though people don't like globalization and this and that, it's given us a global unity, a global consciousness, ethical consciousness, whatever the material results might be. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's really it. I mean, the sense of Buddhism, when I mentioned interdependence, interbeing, it implies an ethical imperative. All beings matter, not just Black Lives Matter, but all beings matter. And then, as sort of related, it's also, well, how do they matter? They matter in their families, in their communities, and that outpouring, I think, is seeing, the families being disrupted, the civilians being impacted, that outpouring of compassion. Will that affect Russia and its decisions? I don't know. On the other hand, as you say, it affects the world. I mean, it's affecting a lot of us. I don't know how it's affecting Congress, and I don't really care. It's, as you say, it's affecting us and a lot of us. And that's good because, right now it's very depressing to see how divided we are. And then, as you say, this is beginning to motivate us into looking at, really caring about somebody other than us. We bring that into the hoop. Yeah, that's the bodhisattva working at that point.
it is, I think, a we.
Yeah.
It's just not an I, although there are a lot of I's going around doing good things, maybe.
Yeah.
But you could feel, at least I do, at least the we-ness.
Yeah. Well, and the only thing wrong,
The non-separateness.
and that's exactly it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the I, except the I immediately then objectifies the you. I mean, so you are an object. And if I'm thinking of you with love, then that I, it thing is broken. And then no problem. I mean, I sit in my zazen. I mean, it's me, it's nobody else. I mean, nothing wrong with an I that includes the we, the them, the muskrat, the tiger, the hunger, the desire. The problem is not the desire for whatever we want. It's the clinging to the way we want it. It's got to happen the way I want it. And that's where, I'm setting myself up for great pain by saying I'm worried about the midterm elections, because that isn't exactly a bodhisattva. We do need better government, but we need a lot of other things too. And I can affect them probably more, as you were just saying, by that feeling of support, of going down to the legislature and having a sign supporting the Ukraine. Congress doesn't come together often, but it came together with $40 million for aid to them, and not just aid, weapons. I mean, we're giving them what they want to succeed. I mean, it's an interesting can of worms, but it's our can, and part of it, I think, is the bodhisattva ideal is we're all in. You can't hold back. We're all in as much as you can until you sit down and rejuvenate yourself with some zazen or whatever form of meditation you do. I mean, you're going to burn. Burnout is another factor. But hope is another factor. I mean, seeing that, I mean, that's a very hopeful image. I wish we had something like that with our racial tension right now too.
We probably do, and we just can't see them yet. And one of the things I really want to thank you for, Bob, as we close, is that in talking about the path, you gave us such clear pictures of those who have walked the path and have shown us the way in little ways and big ways. So many remarkable things that you had to say about Thich Nhat Hanh, who, we're still celebrating the life of that marvelous being. And Wendell Berry, also introducing many of us to the poetry of a Jane Hirschfield. Appreciated that. And referring to our saunterer, our American saunterer, Henry David Thoreau. And then, references, for example, to Chuang Tzu, as well as the Buddha himself. And all of these who have walked the path before us helped to illuminate the way. And so that just seemed so absolutely appropriate in this consideration of the path, traveling the path. Thank you so much.
And we're walking the path together. So, we, through these references that we make, they're right there with us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just want to thank Bob so much for a very clear and just heartwarming talk with us today. Thank you so much. I hope all of you have a wonderful week walking your paths and knowing we walk together.